Hi, thank you so much for joining DragonCon's alternate and historical fiction track and our panel, A Lesson on Roaring 20 Mixology. We are super lucky to have some of the best mixologists that we could find in the Atlanta area join us tonight. And our moderator this evening is Alec Hansen.
Well, you heard the lady. We're here to learn about drinks. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Alex. I will be assisting moderate this panel. Doing a little bit of mixing, mostly drinking. I'd like to introduce you to Andy and Amber, two of our expert mixologists who have so kindly agreed to join us here this evening. They have some wonderful things, historical cocktails prepared. I'm going to show you how to make them, talk to you a little bit about where they came from and how they've evolved through the years. I'm not so fancy myself, so I'm going to start us off with something everyone can make, a gin and tonic. However much I feel like in a little glass. Standard tonic. If you can get quinine syrup, make it yourself. It's much better. Trust me, I don't happen to have any on me at the time. You want 3 parts of tonic. Don't have to be precise with your measurements, but if I'm being recorded, I'm going to do it right. Then you want 1 part gin. I prefer London Dry myself. You can get something a bit more aromatic with a forward flavor if that's your choice. And then finish off with 1 part lime juice. Again, fresh squeezed is best, but I ain't that fancy. Give that a little stir and enjoy. Well, now that amateur hour is over, I'm gonna hand you over to Amber. Amber, what are you gonna make for us tonight?
Thank you so much, Alex. Again, my name is Amber. I am in Atlanta. I'm a professional in the beverage industry for about the past 10 years or so. So when I got invited to do this panel, I was so excited to share with y'all my love of all things spirits related. Tonight, I am going to be making you something that actually predates the Prohibition period by a few years, but as we start talking more about the history of Prohibition and kind of what happened during those years, we'll begin to realize that Prohibition meant no booze. So there weren't a ton of cocktails actively being created during those years. Instead, what happened was we would take old classics or something that might have just started the seeds of becoming really popular, and we built on those and created new, fascinating, fun things out of those things. Andy is a wealth of knowledge on that, so I'm not going to talk too deeply about that. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about Scotch, because I love Scotch. So what I'm going to make for you is a Rob Roy cocktail, which is, for all intents and purposes, a Manhattan, right? We all know that the Manhattan kind of came into being, maybe not so precisely, but somewhere around 1870. So again, much before Prohibition, but people were drinking really good whiskey back then before Prohibition. It was part of the reason why Prohibition happened, right? But the only way to make a really good whiskey better is really good vermouth. So what they did was they took their rye whiskey, they put a little vermouth in there, maybe a dash or 2 of bitters, gave that a good quick stir, make it nice and cold, and pounded it back. Tonight, I'm going to be using what's called Glendronic 12-year-old. So this is a really nice, fat, sticky whiskey, which is kind of my favorite way to enjoy whiskeys. I'm going to pour 2 ounces of that into a stirring glass. Tonight, I'm using a Spanish vermouth, which is something that I'm pretty partial to because it has a bit more of a spicy factor to it, where Italian vermouths are going to be more herbaceous. Spanish vermouths tend to have more of a soft baking spice texture to them that I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of.
Speaking of the textures and the flavors in vermouth, for those of us less acquainted with top shelf liquors, could you give us just a little bit of an explanation what a decent vermouth should taste like? You said the Spanish vermouth is a little spicier versus the Italian is herbaceous. What's just a good baseline vermouth taste like?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and something that's actually kind of hard to answer. Vermouth is really one of those things where you start drinking vermouth and you sort of fall down a rabbit hole, and they're all so different and they all do so many different things. And you, by playing with different things and tasting different ones, you'll find the one that super suits exactly your palate. So where I always start is something that is going to be friendly to everything. So a lot of times when I'm looking for vermouth, I think, okay, well, what am I going to be doing with this? Am I going to be drinking it? Yes. But what else am I going to do with it? Am I going to put it with whiskey? Am I going to put it with gin? Where am I going, right? So I want something that's going to be a little friendlier. And if you have a liquor store that you trust, I would say go and talk to them and say, I am making turn your mouth inside out dry martini, and see what they have, because maybe they have something that you haven't heard of before. Italian vermouths are really great for that because of that big, nice herbaceousness, loves gin. French vermouths are great with whiskey because they have softer, more floral aspects that tend to bolster up the lovely vanilla notes that come from specifically bourbon whiskeys and sometimes rye whiskeys as well. I like Spanish vermouths and Italian vermouths specifically with Scotch because Scotch is drier generally. So they tend to balance each other out a little bit. But I digress. I'm going to add just a couple of dashes of Regan's orange bitters. And that's basically just going to dry out the sweetness of the vermouth, the stickiness of the Scotch, and kind of create a whole picture and hopefully blend those flavors together. So while I do this, a little bit about Rob Roy. Rob Roy is considered the Scottish version of Robin Hood. He was born somewhere in the 1600s. He died sometime in the 1700s. He's a bit of an outlaw. He went to fight in the war for the Jacobites. We all know how that turned out. So he came home, lost his land, got in a bit of a dispute with the landowner, and decided that he was going to raid his cattle, steal his tax money, and generally make his life a living hell. And he did that for somewhere around 20 years, just stealing all of the cattle because it's Scotland and what else do you do? But the cool thing about him was he really did actually give that money back to the community. He supported his friends and family, other people that lived and worked in the community, and became a bit of a folk hero. There was a fictionette series written about him the year after he died. So he was a very popular man. And then they went on to write a musical about him in 1874 called Rob Roy, which premiered in New York City, right next door to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. This cocktail was created in honor of the opening of said operetta and became so popular that it stuck around. So I'm going to express an orange peel over the top of that. I want the oils all over that. And then I'm just going to let this guy float because I like the way he smells.
Could you take a step back real quick? Express. How does one express an orange peel?
So you'll see I kind of cut the side off of that orange. I don't have a Y peeler, so I had to use my channel knife or my paring knife there. But you want to get as much of the peel and pith without getting any of the meat inside. That's kind of the perfect swath is what we'll call that. Basically what you do is you rub the oils off of the outside of that peel, turn it peel down towards your cocktail and squeeze it so the oils squirt out all over the top of your cocktail. That's what expressing is. And basically that's just adding an aromatic boost to your cocktail. By rubbing the outside of your glass with the outside of your peel, you are also spreading the oils around the glass. So it doesn't matter where you drink, you will always get those aromatics.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Slancha. That'll do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Amber. If you could do me just a quick favor, run back through the basic measurements of that, just real quick for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I did was 2 ounces of Scotch whiskey. I used the Glendronic 12-year-old. 1 ounce of Spanish vermouth. Italian vermouth works really well as well. But honestly, if you're drinking responsibly and you're enjoying it, you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. And like you said earlier, vermouth is entirely up to your taste because there's so many different types.
Absolutely. And then I use 2 dashes of Regan's orange bitters, which is my favorite orange bitter. A lot of folks have different opinions on this. There's a lot of great orange bitters out there. And that's another lovely rabbit hole that you can fall down.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. That looks absolutely delicious. I have a feeling I'm going to have to go buy some vermouth after this show. Well, I think that moves us on to Andy. Andy's actually going to be doing 2 drinks in a row for us, if I'm not mistaken. But rather than me telling you about it, Andy, take it away.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Alex. So I am Andy. Honestly, my background's in wine, but I am now considering myself more of a cocktail historian these days because speaking of rabbit holes, I fell down the rabbit hole of like Prohibition era cocktail culture, which very dangerous for my liver and my wallet because it results in me buying way more books than I ever need. So today what I'm going to be making for y'all is a daiquiri, but done 2 ways. And not the strawberry frozen daiquiris that you're familiar with in those crazy frozen daiquiri places. Those have a time and place, not hating on them. But this is so much easier. I mean, just for home consumption. So a little bit of background story. The daiquiri is actually a very fascinating cocktail. It was first invented in the early 1900s in the little mining town of Daiquiri on Cuba. The creator, Jennings Stockton Cox, was an American an American engineer who was sent to Daiquiri to work in the iron mines. And while he was there, he came up with this very refreshing cocktail to kind of help, Havana heat or Cuban heat. I mean, we're here in Atlanta. I think we can relate. So the first cocktail that I'm going to make for y'all is going to be the OG way that they made the original daiquiri. So magically, we have now readjusted so that y'all can actually see what I'm doing. For the original daiquiri, I throw ice everywhere, but what you got to do is you start with crushed ice. So I've taken the liberty of pre-crushing a bunch of ice into this lovely snow cone-like shape.
Now, wait, before the ice got into the glass, what was that bag you had there?
So this is my nifty Lewis ice bag. Its literal entire purpose is to put ice in it, and it comes with a little wooden mallet, and you beat the hell out of it. It's awesome.
So that's how they got crushed ice before we had, refrigerators that did it for us, or blenders or anything. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Instant slushy. It's great. Plus, it also takes out so much aggression. It's wonderful. All right. Next, we're actually going to add 2 bar spoonfuls of sugar on top of this ice. Which I will fully admit, I've actually never tried making the cocktail this way before. So this is going to be a real experiment in how this actually tastes. Next up, we are going to add a full ounce of lime juice, just to kind of help get this dissolving process down. And then we're going to add 2 ounces of rum. Traditionally, this would have been done with a white rum, or however, I am bougie and I like barrel-aged things, so I am using a 5-year-old aged rum because it's delicious. And this is going to go so well. So we have our drink layered just like this, and we give it a stir, and hopefully the sugar will dissolve. I mean, for my teeth's sake, I'm hoping the sugar dissolves. We'll see what actually happens. But really, you want to stir it enough so that the glass starts to frost. Now, being that we are making this cocktail here in Atlanta, let's get that out of the way. It might not actually frost. It might just condensate, but I'll take that too. So at this point, I have a lovely rum slushie. Oh, that's good. That's way more tart than I was anticipating, because I'm pretty sure that sugar didn't fully dissolve. But yeah, that's fun. I can get behind that.
Do you mind if I ask really quickly?
Yeah.
What do you think would happen if you use powdered sugar versus caster sugar or granulated sugar? Would that change the flavor of the cocktail, or would that work at all?
Considering the acidity of the lime juice, I think powdered sugar would work very well. Honestly, probably better than granulated, because it would dissolve like that. It's very funny to watch my hands do all the talking, like the thing. Okay. Sorry for that digression. But yeah, it's I probably should have tried doing this with powdered sugar. That would have been cool. Huh. Well, next time.
In that similar vein, going to keep throwing sugar questions at you.
Yeah.
You said that the granulated sugar didn't dissolve. What about something like a simple syrup? Do you think that would work as well?
So glad you brought that up, because that is exactly how I'm going to make the next daiquiri. Now, this is what most modern bartenders think of when you ask for a traditional daiquiri. So what we're going to do here is the proportions are going to remain roughly the same, but we're going to take a shaker tin. We are going to add 1.5 ounces of rum. We're going to add that lovely, lovely ounce of lime juice again. And then we're going to add 3/4 ounce of simple syrup. Now, what this is actually going to kind of help do is it's really going to help balance that cocktail out, because by using a simple syrup, because simple syrup is sugar and water blended together, you're already helping in the dilution of the drink. And anybody who tells you that a watered down drink is a bad drink is wrong, because that's the entire point of shaking or stirring a cocktail, is to dilute it, to get rid of some of that burning heat that comes in the back of your throat. You want to be able to enjoy yourself, not constantly be gasping for breath. So now I'm going to take larger chunks of ice, just drop it in, and we're going to give it a shake for about 20 seconds or so.
So with this one, we don't want crushed ice. We want the whole ice, because it's being shaken and not stirred. And then we also have the dilution of the water in the simple syrup, like you explained earlier. Is that correct, do you think?
I do apologize. I didn't hear any of that because I had a shaker in my ear.
Oh, that's fine. I was just clarifying. We're using whole ice in this one, not cracked ice already, because the shaking helps with the dilution. You don't need that, correct?
Correct. And because if I were to use crushed ice in the shaker, then it would water down too much. And there is such a thing as a watery drink. It's just not fun. So we're going to go ahead and double strain it just to make it look all fancy. You got that lovely little foam. And voila, we have a traditional daiquiri. And this one, oh yeah, I like that. Voila, beautiful daiquiri, absolutely delicious. I mean, honestly, I'm not much of a rum drinker unless it's a daiquiri. It's just normally it's too sweet of a spirit for me, and I go for gin. So
Well, speaking of, you said rum is too sweet for you. You said that a daiquiri is typically made with a light rum, but you've opted for a dark rum here. Could you give a little explanation about what the difference in the flavors would be and how that would change the drink?
yes. So first of all, I need to specify that I used an aged rum. An aged rum is different from a dark rum because a dark rum is made with molasses, whereas an aged rum gets its color from barrel aging, wherein it sits in a barrel for a number of years. In this case, this one aged for 5 years, and it soaks up all those barrel tannins and various aspects of the barrel that provide additional flavorings like vanilla or coconut, or if you're talking wine, occasionally dill and cinnamon. With the difference between light and dark, in the cocktail sense, the difference between using a white rum like Bacardi or a darker rum like Captain Morgan's, I opted for the aged rum because I really like the complexity that it adds to the drink. Whereas with the lighter rum, it would be entirely too easy to drink because the flavors would be very clean, very bright. There's no additional complexity to it. It's just distilled sugar, which amazing. Don't get me wrong, but I want to take my time with my drink instead of slamming them back after another and then winding up on the floor in a hangover the next day.
You want to taste your drink, not just go to town. We get it.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes perfect
For
sense.
this particular panel, I would like to taste, not be under the table.
Well, thank you so much for that. Those both look delicious. I appreciate you showing us, the what would be original version versus what we would think of now. Very similar, but very different drinks. I think everyone can agree. Thank you so much for that, Andy.
Absolutely.
And well, if you're finished, then I think, Amber, you have another cocktail prepared for us. Are you going to teach us a little bit about the history of it?
Yeah, so the next drink I'm going to make you is called the Tipperary. And I chose it for a few reasons.
I'm sorry, the temporary?
The Tipperary, like
Tipperary.
Tipperary, Ireland. Yeah.
Oh, an Irish drink. Excellent.
Yeah,
Well, first
absolutely.
you're bringing us something from Scotland. Now you're bringing us something from Ireland. Thank you.
I do my best. So I have such a deep abiding love for all things distilled and specifically Irish. I think that it's really interesting how American Prohibition affected the rest of the world. Ireland in particular was going through a really, really rough time. There was already some trouble just within the islands. There was the famine. There was already war going on. There were so many things happening. And Ireland was really, really struggling to the point where hundreds and hundreds of distilleries shut down till there were only 2 and then 3 in 1980 when Cooley opened. So Irish distilling is only existing in its form today because of the incredible veracity of the Irish people. And they make incredible spirits. But because of what they were going through, there aren't very many Irish whiskey cocktails that you will find out in the wild. And the Tipperary is one of the few. And it is particularly interesting because it contains not only Irish whiskey, but another thing that some of you may have heard of that is called Chartreuse. This is a French herbal liqueur that is anisette, herbaceous, spinach, all kinds of lovely things in this glass, paired with a ton of sugar. So it has both sides of the spectrum. And when you pair that with something that's going to be sweeter, basically exclusively, like this lovely Spanish vermouth we just talked about, you kind of get a whirlwind of flavors. So I'm going to build this drink and talk a little bit about the history of this particular cocktail. As they say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And the story goes, in 1916, a young man was coming home from war. He walked into a bar in New York City. Thank you, New York, for being the home of everyone that loves to drink. Walks into a bar humming, going home to Tipperary, and basically said, I need a drink that reminds me of home. The bartender said, boo, I got you. I imagine that's what he said. But we don't know because it's 1916. So we're gonna go with it. So he starts creating this cocktail, and keeping in mind, we already know the Manhattan was made in 1870, boosted in popularity through Prohibition, and partially due to the likes of cocktails that were continuously being made that were based off of it, like the Rob Roy, right? So first we start the Manhattan, bitters, vermouth, whiskey. Rob Roy, different kind of bitters, vermouth, different kind of whiskey. And now we have the Tipperary, bitters, vermouth, Chartreuse, and Irish whiskey. So this is, I'm spilling things everywhere, but that's fine. So this is going to be a play of the same thing, but it's going to treat us just a little bit differently.
So you said it's a play of the same thing. It's going to have all of these same core ingredients with the addition of the chartreuse, you said it was? And that's a herbal liqueur that has, blows my mind. You said it has spinach in it?
So what's interesting about chartreuse is it is one of the only imbibables currently in the US that was grandfathered in under FDA rules. So we don't actually know what's in it. They won't tell us. It's a proprietary blend of herbs and spices. Sounds familiar?
That's terrifying and intriguing. But
very medicinal and very delicious. And something that I highly, highly recommend. It's made by Carthusian monks in France to this day. And there is very, very little changed over the years. So I highly recommend getting your hands on a bottle. There's a couple different versions. There's a yellow version that's a little bit sweeter, but just a lovely addition to any gin cocktail. Whiskey loves it.
So it is an herbal liqueur made in France by monks that no one knows what goes into it, that is drunk by Irish people going to New York from a war in Europe.
Yes. Yes.
I just wanted to make sure I had that tracking right. Okay.
Very.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's very fair to say that drinking is an international language, if I do say so myself.
Oh, come on. That's lovely.
I think that face says everything, folks.
It's so beautiful. I couldn't find my channel knife, so I don't have a lemon twist, but it doesn't need it.
Andy, though, you bring up a very good point. Drinking is an international language. Has been for as long as people have been drinking, which is for as long as people have been people. Except for a short period of time in America where you weren't allowed to. What did people do during that time when the whole rest of the world was allowed to drink, but Americans couldn't. What was their solution? And
Well,
Amber,
in
feel
short,
free to chime in here too.
so the short answer to that is they fucked right off. They hopped on boats, they hopped on whatever means of travel they had available to them, and they got the hell out of America. Which is why, so the daiquiri was invented in 1907, but it really didn't become popular with Americans until Prohibition because they were busy sailing to Cuba. The Manhattan, the Rob Roys, the Tipperaries, everything else made pre-Prohibition, but only became popular during Prohibition because all these cultural icons like Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, E. Cummings, they were literally leaving in droves to go to like Paris, Cuba, wherever they could get a goddamn drink, because we all know that artists need to drink because creative. It was actually such a market, such a boozy market that literally, like, for instance, here with me tonight, this is a cocktail book that was printed in 1923. And it's all in French. I can't read a word of it, but the title translates to 900 recipes for American cocktails, because so many Americans were leaving the United States just to go get a drink, a drink, a smoke, some opium, what have you. So really,
that book is cocktails to be made for Americans, not by Americans.
I mean, ultimately, yeah. Let's see. Well, the funny thing is I believe that it was written by an Italian man. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've already established, drinking's an international language.
Yes.
Everyone speaks beer.
Yeah. Yep. So it's amazing to see the overlap, because even with these cocktails, like, there are culturally very similar cocktails in various stages. Like the daiquiri is very similar to a cocktail that the British Royal Navy would drink in 1795 called grog, and that was to prevent scurvy. Literally the same ingredients, they just didn't have ice. Done. You can go to Brazil and get a caipirinha, which is, again, sugar, lime, and their version of rum, which is cachaça. It's Prohibition took something that was, is it a vice? I mean, yes, but it's also a way to communicate with people, because if you know you like a cocktail in your culture, chances are you can find something very similar, but just different enough to keep it interesting in another culture. It's absolutely fascinating. And honestly, without spirits, we wouldn't have the literary greats. So.
Right. And I think you're so right. I mean, Prohibition affected so much of the world, and it affected the drinking culture all over the world. I mean, we talked about Ireland, we talked about France, and just folks traveling and just looking for ways to enjoy, their vice. And the cocktails, I think what's interesting is, personally, I started with something that was created in 1870. We kind of moved through the years into a current iteration. But I do think what's interesting is even further in England, where gin was so popular and people were drinking dry martinis and vermouth like it paid their bills. Rather than doing the Rob Roy, they swapped out the sweet vermouth with white dry vermouth and garnished it with an olive. And kind of created, while the Manhattan is already a martini, but they created this sort of dry version of a Scotch martini that kind of gained in popularity around 1923 and was wild through Prohibition, and then kind of died off on the other side of Prohibition when folks could get good Scotch again. So, it's just really interesting how Prohibition didn't just affect the way that we drank and the way that we created spirits and altered spirits to become potable, but also that reflected in every country where drinking was already part of their culture as well.
Well, I have an interesting little fact. I would like to personally thank whoever invented grog or caparina. One of you may know. I personally thank you for this because I have had scurvy before. It was not an enjoyable experience. You hear a lot of jokes about pirates getting scurvy and blah, blah, blah. It's not fun. Your mouth bleeds a lot and you're very sick for a very long time, even once it's cured. So drink your grog, kids. Adults, drink your grog, not kids. Just eat an orange.
Adult kids, yeah. Yeah.
Now I know, and I can never unknow that. So thank you so much for that, Alex.
I'll let you know that was the toned down version of what actually happened.
That's fine. That's fine. Just there.
You're better off not knowing. That's I'm agreeable to that. So, well, thank you both so much for presenting both of these cocktails, both of them each for total. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this? Anything that you weren't able to touch on that made tangential sense to your cocktails or anything you had? We've gotten to the point in our show where I've had 3 of these so far, so I don't really care about what the format's like anymore. Have you got a joke about drinking? A funny limerick? Any tips for avoiding hangovers? Give them to me.
Well, I mean, the tip for avoiding hangovers is drinking responsibly.
I knew you were going to say that.
But also, we touched a little bit, Andy, on Hemingway in Cuba and drinking all of these rum cocktails. I know that there are like so many stories about the things that he created there. Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, Hemingway, like literally every author in the 1920s was a prolific drinker. And I think the cocktail that he's most known for is literally called the Hemingway Daiquiri or the Papadoble. So Hemingway also had diabetes, so he couldn't have sugar. So he went to this bar called the Floridita, and what they did was he asked them for a daiquiri that was double the rum and no sugar. And while the original one that they made him was that, they improved upon the recipe until it became like a double pour of white rum, the juice of 2 limes, juice of half a grapefruit, and 6 drops of maraschino liqueur to kind of give it that sweetness that all that citrus was sapping out of it.
edge, yeah.
Yeah. So that is.
Can you say that a little bit slower? I might have to go shopping tomorrow. That was
well,
a double pour of rum.
Yes. Juice of 2 limes, which I think today would probably be, depending on the lime, I would assume about an ounce and a half of lime juice. If you're juicing half of a grapefruit, that's probably going to be roughly the same ounce and a half of grapefruit juice, and then 6 drops of maraschino liqueur. And that maraschino liqueur is absolutely delicious. I highly recommend looking for the Luxardo brand just because it is, I mean, that's the classic. That is the absolute classic. Has a little bat. Yeah, just like what Amber's holding.
To the rescue.
Yes. So yeah, that is the Hemingway daiquiri, which does sound absolutely delicious.
The Papadoble? Is that what you called it?
Yep, the Papadoble. So good old Cuba. Yeah.
Is it true? You seem to know a good bit about Hemingway. Is it true that he specifically bought a house beneath the lighthouse so he could find his way home at 3 a.m?
You know what? I have not looked into the validity of that story, but based on
I
the
got anchor.
lifestyle he led, I would not be surprised. Actually, what I do find really funny is, so after he spent time in Cuba, he also went to Paris and he would hang out with his literary contemporaries, F. Scott Fitzgerald, E. E. Cummings, the big ones. And what I found absolutely fascinating about this is, so there's this book I was reading, I don't remember the name of it, but it mentioned that back in Prohibition era Paris, to figure out somebody's bar tab, they didn't have like paper tickets. They had saucers, and the price of the drink was printed on the bottom of the saucer. So your drink would be served on the saucer. And after you finished the drink, the glass would be taken away, but the saucer remained on the table. And so you would wind up with these stacks of saucers. And there was a photo of 3 of these authors and stacks of saucers. Like they were spending hundreds of dollars in 1920s money just on booze and cafes. It was probably the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. I actually kind of love the concept, and I would love to see bars bring that back, because nothing tells you you've had enough like a stack of saucers.
See, this is a business proposal that I believe I've discussed with you before, Andy. A revolving sushi bar, but with hooch.
That's not where I thought that was going.
Well, at the revolving sushi bars, they give you the plates and you're charged by the color of the plate. But with gin and rum and vermouth.
What I was thinking is that we would do like a French cocktail night. We would have little posters that look like saucers, and we put the little cost on there, and then people could get little collectible stacks of coasters. But you're right, revolving sushi is way better.
See,
Yeah.
again, I opened this panel as your moderator telling you the most complicated drink I know how to make is a gin and tonic. Of course, I'm going to go for the low crowd here. You're thinking too highly of me.
I love it. I love it all.
Excellent.
All right. Well, I think we are about to start wrapping up here. We're almost out of time. So let's go ahead and do some shameless advertising. Amber, do you have anything you'd like to plug with us? Do you have an Instagram, a Facebook group, something you're selling? Go ahead, give it to us here. We'll get links from you, put them in the description so all of our adoring fans can leech off of your liqueur expertise.
I love it. Actually, I am the brand ambassador for the Glendronic Scotch whiskey, among other Scotch whiskeys, and the Slain Irish whiskey, which is what I made that Tipperary out of. So if you liked that cocktail and would like to know more details, you could follow me on Instagram at Drams with Amber. So Drams as in a dram of whiskey with me, Amber. And you will get loaded down with mostly baking recipes, but also I can talk a little bit about cocktails.
For those of us that are less in the know, could you spell dram? Is that with an H?
It is DRAMS. Drams with Amber.
So no H. Excellent. Thank you. Again, we'll have the links. We'll get them from our panelists. So something clickable for you all. And now we're going to, Andy, I know you have a podcast that I love listening to. What have you got to hawk for us?
Yeah, so I do a wine podcast, the Wound Up Wino. We actually just recently returned, so I'm very excited to be sharing new episodes with everybody. You can find me at on Instagram at Wound Up Wino. Though if you're looking for more of my cocktail work, you definitely want to hit up my other Instagram at Across the Pine. Otherwise, you can find my website at www.woundupwino.com. And yeah, I have a Twitter, never use it, don't bother with it. So
I'm impressed that I've been able to even keep up with Instagram. I've just been like through the pandemic, I was like, I guess I should like post about what I'm doing. And mostly that was just learning to make bread like everyone else.
I tried. I failed.
Bread's a cake, man. That's all I did for a year.
Well, I'm glad that you learned to make bread and then taught all of our lovely viewers here how to make 4 delicious cocktails. Everyone, please give a round of applause for Amber and Andy, our expert mixologists, for sharing all of their historical, factual-ish information with all of you and teaching you how to have a wonderful time drinking your way through history. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is DragonCon Alt History signing off. We hope to see you later.